All right, let's start with the big story that we're tracking at this hour, where the remains of the 38 Indians killed by the so-called Islamic State terrorists in Iraq are expected to reach India shortly. The Iraqi Health Ministry has handed over the remains of the Indian nationals to the Indian Embassy. The Federal Minister of State for External Affairs, General V.K. Singh, reached Iraq on Sunday afternoon to bring back the bodies of the 39 Indians. The General V.K. Singh's aircraft is expected to land at Amritsar in the North Indian state of Punjab. The minister in the state, Navjot Singh Sidhu, will also be present at the airport to receive the bodies, and sources have told WION that no further DNA testing or matching or any forensic tests will be conducted on the bodies which are to be brought back by V.K. Singh. Now, after Amritsar, V.K. Singh will also be travelling to Patna, Kolkata, to hand over the bodies to the relatives. Now, as many as 40 hostages had been taken by the ISIS in Mosul way back in 2014, and 39 of them were declared dead last week, while one of those who had been abducted by the ISIS had managed to escape by posing as a Bangladeshi Muslim. The others were taken to a prison in Badush and reportedly were shot dead. The remains of one of the victims is yet to be identified.
We are with everybody who's fighting against terrorism. We understand the consequences. We know that there are no good or bad terrorists. They're all terrorists. And terrorism in any form and manifestation is abhorrent to us.
Everyone in India is pained because of this bereavement. We actually think it's very unfortunate, but what is beyond control has got to be accepted as God's will. Therefore, we share the pain of all the families, and we are with them. And the Honorable Chief Minister has personally directed me to be with them, facilitate the last rites, which will happen very soon, and also whatever we can do in this painful hour to actually be a support from the government side, we shall do. He said it on the floor of the House.
All right, so that was General V.K. Singh and also Navjot Singh Sidhu. They're talking about the bodies which are to be brought back by General V.K. Singh in the C-17 Globe Master. Remember, General V.K. Singh had left yesterday for Iraq after he got confirmation and clearances from the Iraqi Foreign Ministry that the bodies could be brought back to India. And I'm now told that we are joined by Daniele Pagani, who's joining us from Amman in Jordan, and also my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran is also joining us from the newsroom. Daniele, let me begin with you. You know, immediately after Mosul had been freed from the ISIS, you had gone to Iraq, you were at Mosul, and this was one of the most difficult tasks, where 39 Indians who had been abducted by ISIS, no one knew as to what had happened with them. They'd been abducted in 2014, and now the Indian government, after having collaborated with the Iraqi government there, have managed to identify and find the bodies, and 38 of those bodies are being brought back.
I think this is a very good example of cooperation between two countries, and one of these two countries is Iraq, which is a country facing, as you can imagine, as we can all imagine, very, very difficult challenges. The Islamic State has not been completely finished. They are still fighting on the border with Syria. There is an enormous amount of destruction and enormous bill to foot when it comes to the reconstruction. So the fact that the Iraqi authorities, with the help of the Indian government, never gave up in looking for these 39 Indians, 39 Indians among the thousands of Iraqi citizens who perished during the Mosul campaign, but also the other battles, Fallujah, Ramadi, during the Islamic State war. So I think it's a very good example of cooperation. Unfortunately, this is obviously not a nice end to a story. We would have wanted to give another kind of news, but at least now the families know what happened. It will be very difficult to reconstruct precisely what happened after 2014, because obviously there are no witnesses who can help us to understand.
Right, do continue to stay on with us, Daniele Pagani. Meanwhile, I also have my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran, who's joining us from the newsroom. Ramesh, you know, the families had been waiting for almost 4 years. It was not the kind of news that they expected, but now a certain sense of closure has perhaps been given to them.
Indeed, as we've been discussing here all day, Mohammed, we are one step closer to the closure after nearly 4 years of endless wait for the families and friends and relatives of the 39 Indians who went missing in Iraq in 2014. And we are, barely 50 minutes away from the aircraft landing at Amritsar. The first stop on a 3-state tour that will take the aircraft first to Amritsar in Punjab and then to Bihar and West Bengal, where all the 39 bodies, the mortal remains, will be handed over to the families and consigned to flames. Now, as you mentioned, it's been an agonizingly long wait, an endless wait for the families who've had to face the uncertainty of not knowing for a fact whether their loved ones, their brothers, father or husbands were alive or dead all these 4 years. Remember, they went missing in Mosul in June 2014, barely days after Mosul fell to the so-called Islamic State. And since then, there was no information about their whereabouts until in July last year, after the liberation of Mosul from the so-called Islamic State. The first signs of any information came to light. And then the government began tracking the whereabouts of the missing Indians.
Right.
And most recently, the DNA samples were matched and the confirmed identities were shared with the Indian government. Remember, there were 40 Indians, one escaped, that left us with 39, of which one is still to be identified. So 38 bodies are on that aircraft which will land in Amritsar in about 10 minutes from now, Mohammed.
Absolutely indeed, Ramesh. Do continue to stay on with us. There was one body which was not completely matched. It was said that only about 70% of the DNA matched, and hence there was more testing that needed to be done before it was established as to what was the identity of the individual who had been killed. Now, Daniel, if I can bring you in on this, you were in Mosul, immediately after Mosul had been liberated from the ISIS. How big a challenge do you think this would have been to identify those 39 bodies of these Indians? No one knew as to what fate had befallen them. They had been abducted by the ISIS. They were reportedly taken to a prison in Badoosh, and then no one has an idea as to what has happened. It's being said that they were shot dead by the ISIS. How big a challenge do you think this must have been for the Indian and also the Iraqi government there in identifying that these indeed are the Indians who had gone missing?
I would describe you the situation that I met in Mosul when I went there the second time. The first time was during the offensive for months. When I reached Mosul, a couple of weeks after the Iraqi Prime Minister said it was the final victory, still there were operations inside the western part of Mosul when we were looking on, trying to understand what happened to these 39 Indians. So Mosul is a city divided in two by a river. The western part of Mosul, the old part of Mosul, is nearly completely destructed, was nearly completely destroyed because there was a massive airstrike campaign to fight against the Islamic State, hold up in the western part of the city. It is still not clear how many people died during the offensive, but the number could be close to 20,000. So imagine an enormous amount of rubble, an entirely destroyed city, a part of the city where nearly 1 million people could have lived. So we're talking about a relevant portion of territory with thousands of people dead, all the houses are reduced to rubble. So that was the scene where the Iraqi authorities had to look.
Absolutely indeed, Daniel. Do stay on with us. I'll come back to you to describe as to what exactly that you saw when you went to Mosul and also to Badoosh. But Ramesh, if I can bring you in on this, the fact of the matter is, this is an issue that has also in some ways become a political one. At the time that Sushma Swaraj was making the announcement in the upper house of the parliament, there was a lot of ruckus that was created. She could at least speak in the upper house of the parliament in Rajya Sabha, but in Lok Sabha, she was not even allowed to address the house, and then the house had to be adjourned. The opposition accused the government of lying to the nation and to the families of the 39 missing Indians, saying that they were being kept on false hope. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, Mohammed, this is an emotional matter, no doubt, for the families of the 39 missing Indians who are now confirmed dead. But that aside, it did become a political issue. It might be still a political issue for many families in Punjab and other states where where some of the elections might be due between now and the next elections in 2019. But that said, there are two key principal complaints or grievances. One, why did Minister Swaraj keep the families in the dark all these months and years?
Right.
Was the government hiding at all any from the families? What information did they hide? And why did they keep telling the families that we do not know for a fact whether they are dead or alive, and therefore the presumption of life was misleading to a large extent? That's number one. Number two, why did Minister Swaraj have to break the news of the families from the Parliament and not take them into conference before she made the announcement in Parliament? So that's a big complaint on the part of families in particular, who say we were completely taken by surprise by Minister's announcement on the floor of the House. They should have informed the families first before going public with the news of their death. So these are two major grievances against the government, but on balance, Mohammed, government says it could not have announced their deaths or life without concrete proof.
Right.
Or evidence. And that began trickling in only after July last year, when Mosul was liberated from the so-called Islamic State. And then information began trickling in about their last being spotted in the Badoush jail, and how the DNA samples were matched, and then 39 Indians were identified. So clearly, the government says it has its own reasons not to have jumped the gun, so to speak, and declared them dead or alive before having concrete evidence in their hand.
Absolutely indeed, Ramesh. That's an important point there, where Sushma Swaraj had stated that, look, it is not possible to declare these 39 Indians to be dead unless there is proof that they are indeed dead. And until that point of time, it is important that the government should actually work on the presumption that they are still missing, and there could be a remote possibility that they could in fact be found. So this is, of course, a story that we will continue to track. We expect that General VK Singh will, of course, be getting the bodies back. We expect the flight, the C-17 Globemaster, to land in some time now in Amritsar. For the time being, thank you very much indeed to both Ramesh Ramachandran and also to Daniel Ipagani, who had joined us from Amman. We'll come back to you guys as soon